All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, when Shannon Sharpe and Skip Bayless first started their show Undisputed a couple of years ago, Shannon used to be very fond of a certain saying that he stated he got from his grandmother or from his grandfather, one of the two. He said that his grandmother or his grandfather would tell him that a person will tell you the truth on three separate occasions: when they're upset with you, when they're drunk, or when they're done with you. And that's very true. And that sentiment certainly seems to apply to Mr. Richard Sherman. I believe that Richard Sherman understands that the NFL is going to be done with him very soon. So now he's starting to become very fond of making very inflammatory statements. I think his understanding that his own athletic mortality is going to be coming upon him very soon, along with the fact that he's being galvanized by social media and by many of the athletes in the NBA who seem to, at least in the view of NFL players, have the ability to speak their minds and say and do what they want and have their owners abide by their wishes. And of course, they also have guaranteed contracts in the NBA. Because at the end of the day, brothers, not to digress, but this whole kneeling situation, that's all that's really about. It's not about police brutality. It's really about the NFL players being upset that they don't have fully guaranteed contracts. That's what their quibble is about. That is why Colin Kaepernick has this collusion lawsuit, because he understands that if he's able to win this case, that the court is going to decertify the collective bargaining agreement between the players and the owners. But just getting back to Mr. Richard Sherman, Richard seems to know that that light at the end of the tunnel is a train that is approaching, and that train is going to run him over. His athletic career is going to be over very soon, and he's practicing his hot takes because he's going to end up either on ESPN or Fox Sports 1, most likely ESPN, because ESPN is the super liberal sports network. And he's going to be able to give all his hot takes and his insights. I'm on record as stating that I truly believe that Richard Sherman is one of the more overrated intellects in the sports world. I'm not calling the brother dumb. I just believe that the liberal sports media fets him way too much just because he happens to be a so-called black athlete that went to Stanford. I'm truly a believer that most of the truly higher intellects in professional sports that happen to be so-called black men are most likely very reticent and are not willing to share their views, their opinions, their sentiments, because they know that there's going to be a great backlash. Because unfortunately, the so-called black community for the most part seems to be galvanized by superliberalism. And if you have a highly functioning brain, you're going to see right through a lot of the superliberal bullshit. But let's move forward and see what Mr. Richard Sherman has to say about Jerry Jones, who he has decided to analogize to a slave owner, which oftentimes is low-hanging fruit for woke black athletes in the professional sports world. So anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Richard Sherman, though, never one, obviously, to shy away from expressing himself, isn't feeling Jerry Jones' recent comments on the anthem controversy at all, telling USA Today's Jarrett Bell, quote, "The owner of the Dallas Cowboys with the old plantation mentality, what did you expect?"
No, sir, he does not have an old plantation mentality. If he had an old plantation mentality, you'd be playing football for free. That's what a plantation mentality is, sir. That's why I state that many of these guys, they try to give their pseudo hot takes, their pseudo intellectual insight, and there's nothing intellectual about it. As a matter of fact, they shame and they demean their ancestors and what their ancestors allegedly went through when they make statements like that, when they try to make correlations like that. And why do I say allegedly went through? Because not all so-called black people have ancestry that were enslaved. But our people believe that because that's part of their slave programming through the so-called educational system. But once again, what the Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones is embodying is a businessman. For those of you brothers who've been on my channel long enough, you know that I've been following the Colin Kaepernick narrative very closely. And I've been telling you that both the NFL and ESPN have been forced to soften their stances to a degree in regards to the anthem protests, because in my view it was very clear and obvious that Donald Trump has threatened both ESPN and the NFL with tax levies. And that's the reason why he's been able to get the NFL owners to fall in line very quickly and easily. That's how you engage in commercial warfare. And that's all this is about, is commercialism. The NFL protests are all about commercialism. The players are upset because their contracts are not fully guaranteed. The president is upset because they're not standing for the national anthem. Not just because of a sense of nationalism or patriotism, but when you don't stand for the national anthem, that alienates a large portion of your constituency, of your viewership. They turn off the television. That means the NFL loses revenue. That means the IRS loses revenue. because that's a smaller pie for the IRS to take a chunk from when tax time comes. It's all about commercial. It's all about the commercial aspect.
Fact. Dominique, what's your reaction to that comment from Sherman?
Yeah, I love Richard, and he's someone I would probably consider a friend, but he's a very smart person, and anytime people bring up Richard Sherman's name, they say he's a smart guy who went to Stanford and that sort of stuff.
Yes, isn't that strange, sir? I think that you noticed some of the same things that I noticed.
But I think that it matters because I think it's strategic. Like, Richard knew that saying this is going to garner the attention that it has, and it's going to have people continue to talk about it.
Yes, it's going to garner attention for himself because he's preparing himself for his post-football life. I saw footage of Richard Sherman trying to guard a wide receiver on the San Francisco 49ers one-on-one, and he got absolutely smoked. Absolutely smoked. As we all know, he's coming off of an Achilles rupture. He is playing probably the singular position in the NFL and maybe all of sports that demands the most fast twitch muscle fiber action, that being cornerback. So we'll see how well he plays. We know that his contract that he himself negotiated is almost exclusively and entirely performance and incentive laden. So has he made a mistake? We'll see. I'm on record as stating that I agreed with him, that I co-signed him betting on himself. But of course, no risk, no reward. And sometimes when you go big, you got to go home. But we'll find out. I believe that Richard has a series of contingency plans should his NFL career flame out. That being that he's going to be Mr. Hot Take. A few years ago, Richard Sherman was at the center of a controversy at the other end of the black woke internet revolutionary spectrum when he stated that all lives matter, not just black lives matter. It seems to me that a couple of years in that Seattle Seahawks locker room forced him down that woke rabbit hole. And now he's decided that he's going to put forth a series of very inflammatory comments that oftentimes are misplaced and misguided just to garner some attention for himself. But once again, just like the quote that I alluded to from Shannon Sharpe, when people know that they're done with you or that you're done with them, all of a sudden they're going to put forth all the things that they may have thought about you but never said. And then they're going to put some barbecue sauce on top of it and put forth some lies. And whatever sticks, sticks.
I don't necessarily think it's particularly relevant whether it qualifies. I don't want to go through all the criteria like, yes, check, this is like a plantation. No, that's not like a plantation. I think the point that he's making is that Jerry Jones is coming out with this authoritarian type of approach where it's like...
No, sir, he's not coming out with an authoritarian type of approach. He's coming out with an ownership type of approach. Unfortunately, so many brothers in this society do not have a ruling class mentality, so they cannot relate to the mindset of presiding over something. Because most so-called black men do not have authority to even have a sense of authority in their house. I'm going to say it again. Most so-called black men, most brothers don't even have the authority to have a sense of authority in their own house because most of them, if they're married, are being bullied by their woman. The so-called black man is raised to be intimidated by his own woman. And that's a fact. So it's just very interesting that so many of them get on TV and try to assess the mindset of a Jerry Jones, someone who owns a multitude of corporations and has to preside over them and has to create codes and laws within his own corporation to make sure that it's as bountiful, as fruitful as it can be.
I say what goes, this is what goes. That's about feeding Jerry's ego, and I think that...
No, sir, that's about feeding his business. That's about feeding his bank account. That's what being an owner is all about. Just because you go home and your wife tells you what to do, it does not mean that every man's mind operates on that level.
That is, if I'm right about interpreting what Richard's saying, I think that's what he's saying, more so than it's like a plantation.
Yeah, I see it as a...
In other words, you're trying to clean it up because you know that what he said was extremely irresponsible. Extremely irresponsible.
Comment on the power dynamic here, right? Which is the reason Jerry Jones, we talked about, he's catering to his fan base, he's catering to his own ego, but he's also trying to assert his power over the players.
Yep.
And
well, once again, when you're an employee, that basically means that you're a paid servant. That means that you have to understand and respect the chain of command. Just like all of you employees at ESPN, when your boss puts forth an edict, you have to follow it. Much like Jamel Hill and Michael Smith, and I stated to you brothers many moons ago that ESPN eventually was going to have to remove the both of them because they decided that they were going to turn SportsCenter into wokenegro.com. And people were tired of listening to and watching that bullshit. I would put on their show at 6 p.m. and literally from 6 to 7 p.m., all it was those two idiots looking at one another, playing a violin about how sorry everyone should feel for so-called black people. The shit was tired and it was hackneyed. So-called black man, once again, we have the power within ourselves. We don't have to beg anybody. We don't have to get down on one knee like we're asking the mainstream white society to marry us. Stand up on your feet and be your own savior. That's what it's about. And we have to stick together. That's what it's about. It's not about begging a white man for shit. Nobody's ever going to respect you as long as you're down on one knee.
And sadly, that power exists because we can talk about, does this mean free agents will avoid the Cowboys? Looking at Malcolm Jenkins' comments, and perhaps that would happen in a league like the NBA where there are fewer players and they have more power. That's not going to happen in the NFL. I don't care how unpopular an owner is, how upset what they are. Maybe with a quarterback possibly who has his choice, but it's so hard to get paid and have a career in the NFL as it is.
And therefore you're much more expendable. So no matter how much engineering you try to install or instill or execute within the NFL framework, is never going to be as potent or as powerful as in the NBA. And the fact of the matter is that the average NBA athlete, especially the average NBA superstar, has already been appeased. Number one, by his fully guaranteed contract. Number two, by his shoe deal. Number three, by his ancillary endorsements. So what truly does Steph Curry or LeBron James have to complain about? And beyond that, what do they really have to lose? If they get cut from their team because they're making inflammatory statements, they still have millions of dollars in the bank from what they earn from Nike, from Reebok, from Under Armour, from Gatorade, from Pepsi, from Coke, so on and so forth. Once again, this is truly about the jealousy of the NFL players towards the NBA, that they have no guaranteed contracts. That's all this is about. They could give two shits about the average black man being harassed by the cops.
Jerry Jones knows that, the owners know that, and as a result, they're exploiting their power when they, make statements like this.
You're right, but Richard is an executive committee member of the Players Association. I think the difference is no single player, you can include quarterbacks, necessarily is big enough to have power against the owners, but them as a whole, they do. If all of the Cowboys or half of the Cowboys decided to kneel or stay in the locker room, Jerry Jones can't do anything about that. And on a macro kind of issue...
Well, that's on Planet Woke Negro, that half the players on the Cowboys are going to kneel in an attempt to protest Jerry Jones's edict. And that's only on Planet Woke Negro. The average football player on the Dallas Cowboys wants to play, he wants playing time, and he wants the glory of being a part of America's team. That's all it's about. And unfortunately, you have a very silent majority of so-called blacks in the NFL who just don't want to be bothered with being harassed by a lot of these super liberal internet revolutionaries on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, talking about how everybody's a coon because they won't stand with Kaepernick. They're usually a bunch of fatherless, simple-ass mama's boys who have no idea what it's like to truly be responsible for yourself.
Of the union as a whole, if all of the players are united in some way, they can accomplish just about anything. As someone who's been through plenty of union fights myself, I know that to be the case. The power is in the collective strength of the players, not in any individual player, which is probably the power dynamics are quite different in the NBA, because you could have all the NBA players trying to do something, but it don't matter if LeBron's not on board.
And Dominic, as you know, the players haven't even been united on this issue, right? You've got the Players Coalition, you've got protesters, Kaepernick, Eric Reed, all with different sort of ideas about what the best way is to go about this.
Of course, because they have no real end game. What is the end game for the woke Negro? What is your end game for the internet revolutionary? They have none. You know why? Because their tactics of protest are really just a lot of the attention mongering that they learned from their mother when they were being raised, quote unquote. Once again, that's the importance of the so-called black man presiding over his household. That's why I always try to accentuate to brothers that you have to make sure that you use your scruples when you pick the woman that you're going to inseminate, when you pick the woman that you're going to procreate with. You cannot look at that as a light thing in regards to the woman that you choose to procreate with. Oh, she has a fat ass. Let me skeet up inside of her and make some babies. No, bro, it don't work like that. That woman has to be tested over a series of years. You have to see how she conducts herself in moments of adversity. Does she respect the masculine principle? That's what it's about. Does she honor your word? Like a lot of these females that come on my channel trying to go back and forth with me, I tell them, you have to go back and forth with your man. You really shouldn't be speaking to me. Because if I'm not getting any food from you or no coochie from you, I'm wasting my time talking to you because you damn sure have nothing to teach me.
It's the notion that an entire team, say on the Cowboys, or even half the team would come together is so foreign for that reason, and also because the careers are so short, because it carries such a risk. To me, that's what Richard Sherman is commenting on when he talks about this power imbalance.
Yeah, and also saying stand at attention, toe the line, that has a lot of negative historical significance. Is a very
Well, no, actually that term stand at attention, toe the line, that's really a military term. And as we know, there are always correlations made between the NFL and the military. Now, if you want to try to make it a prison term, you can do that if you want to. But I believe that that's more of a military correlation.
very poor word choice by Jerry Jones as well, and they probably should have been a little more sensitive to that. Guys, that'll do it on that subject.
Well, Miss Molly Karam, there's very little sensitivity in business. At the end of the day, many of these brothers have to be saved from themselves because they've all fallen down that woke rabbit hole. And when I say they all, I'm talking about the ones who have decided to conform to a lot of the machinations of these pseudo-social engineers in the NFL. These people who have allowed themselves to be manipulated. These people who have allowed themselves to be manipulated by the Marxist mindset of create as much chaos as possible and hope that the order that will be brought forth from the rubble will be something that we like. And that's just not something that can be guaranteed. But anyway, peace.